Welcome to Bucs Insider Live. Casey Phillips here with senior writer and editor Scott Smith, and we have plenty to talk about now, as we have recently. This is this time of year, man. It's a busy time of year. That first of all, there's some free agency stuff still going on. The owners' meetings where Coach Bowles spoke and voted on some different rules. So a lot of different things. First, I guess since our last show, we had the official Lavonte David news. Which
is great.
We've got to talk to them about their timing. It feels like they wait until right after our show to do these things.
Exactly.
So we weren't able to talk about it.
Well, we moved up to Wednesday this week. Tried to throw them off a little bit.
We did. We tried to throw them off a little bit. So let's get into this Lavonte David one, other than just the fact that I'm sure everyone out there is thrilled, every Bucs fan, anyone who knows anything about Lavonte is just thrilled. So tell me your thoughts.
I think it's pretty clear now in the aftermath that he could have probably gotten a little bit more somewhere else, but it was very important to Lavonte, if the deal could work out right, for him to remain a Buccaneer. He said on multiple occasions he wants to be a Buccaneer for his entire career. You know, he's been a captain for the last 9 years. He's beloved here, and he even knew, I mean, legacy is important to him, and he even knew, he threw this out on his own. I don't know if somebody told him before, but only 3 other players, this will be his 12th season, only 3 other players in franchise history have played at least 12 seasons and played their whole career for the Buccaneers. And they're icons.
Yep.
I mean, Lavonte David is now a Tampa Bay Buccaneer icon, right?
Of course.
But he's still playing very well also. And Rondé Barber, Derek Brooks, Paul Gruber, the only other guys, and you see these are the ranks, the top 4 in games played and games started in team history. Tackles, obviously it doesn't count for Paul Gruber, but Rondé, Derek, and Lavonte are 1, 2, and 3, and looks like Lavonte is pretty close to being 2. If anybody out there is screaming a couple names at their screen right now, yes, Mike Allstott was on the roster for 12 years, but he didn't play the 12th season, and the idea here is seasons played.
Right.
But obviously he's an icon too.
Yes.
And then Dave Moore played 13 seasons as a Buccaneer, but also had a bit with the Bills.
Non-consecutively, right. And if, you know, I'm not great at math, but it looks like Lavonte has the chance to move up in that games played, games started this year, that it looks like he was, I think, I was looking at maybe 17 games back.
Yeah, he could if he plays every game.
If he plays every game this year, he would catch Paul Gruber.
That's
that's pretty exciting as well.
And we hope he does that.
Yes. So another signing that happened since our last show, Greg Gaines. Tell us about your thoughts on what he could bring to this defense and some of the just overall where that leaves. Especially, I feel like the defensive line is an area we haven't talked about as much as maybe some of the other positions. So what could that look like?
Well, we hadn't talked about it much because a lot of the guys weren't there. They were free agents. Some of them still are. But Greg Gaines, it's funny because he played at Washington, was teammates with Vita for 3 years, and they had almost identical stats when they were done. And then Vita left a year earlier and went to the Bucs in the first round. He was drafted by the Rams in the 4th round. Greg Gaines was, and he didn't play a ton, about 20 to 25% of the snaps his first 2 years, and then he got an opportunity over the next 2 years, the last 2 years, to start, and just raising his stats, his snap counts up to about 70%, then you start to get the production. 4 sacks in those 2, so 8.5 sacks in those 2 years, which is good out of a guy that is already a good run plugger in the middle, and it's the kind of free agent you like to get. He's still in his prime. He's only played in the season 4 years, and when he's had a chance to play more, he's produced. He started in the Super Bowl for the Rams, you know, had 3 tackles. So it's a great addition for the Buccaneers, especially because they had so many defensive linemen hit free agency. Now, some of it, they're coming back, and I actually, this graphic had to be changed at the last minute because Deidrin Sanat was re-signed yesterday. So we are getting some of them back, and you can see how it might work out. You add Greg Gaines in there, and he probably soaks up 500-something snaps. Right now, you don't have Will Golston or Akeem Hicks back, and you've lost Nacho. So at the least, Greg Gaines is a 1-for-1 replacement for Nacho. But at the owners' meetings yesterday, Coach Bowles did say that Hicks and Golston were still possibilities to re-sign with the Buccaneers. So you could end up with all those guys, almost all those guys back.
Which is so interesting. Do you feel like that is a likely thing with the way the salary cap is sitting? Is it maybe going to be a little tough to get those guys back? Just kind of where are we at this point with what's gone on?
I guess what I'd say is I didn't think it was very likely that those guys were coming back prior to yesterday.
Right, but then now,
with Coach saying, yeah, that is still an option for us, and they haven't signed anywhere else yet. So it may be that the Buccaneers, and you see these moves kind of happening, one this week, one next week, it may be that they have to do it kind of slow and methodically because of the tight cap restrictions. I mean, the Ryan Suckup release, we released kicker Ryan Suckup, which we'll talk about in a second, saved about close to $4 million under cap space, and then you start using that cap space again. So it's a bit of a give and take.
He was also asked about Logan Ryan, and I thought that was an interesting one as well, who hasn't been brought back yet, but knowing now that you've lost Sean Murphy-Bunting, you've lost Mike Edwards, you know, is that a guy that maybe you're hoping veteran could at least fulfill some of that.
Yeah.
A guy that's been here for a little while.
And a versatile guy. I think that was the one question I couldn't make out because I had to watch it on video.
Right.
I'm not in Arizona, obviously. And that may be the one I couldn't make out, so that's news to me. But I could see why they want him back because he's a versatile guy. He might even be able to play in the slot, and I had somebody that was there ask for me, do you guys have an option on the roster to play the slot? Because obviously with re-signing Jamel, you've got Carlton and Jamel as your outside corners, but who's playing in the slot? Because another thing he made clear, and we've talked about it here, is that he said earlier in this offseason that he wants Antoine Winfield to focus on one role rather than the hybrid thing he was doing last year. And yesterday he clarified that that role would be free safety.
Right.
So he's not your slot corner anymore. So that's an open job, and Sean Murphy-Bunting probably would have been a candidate if he were still here, but he signed with the Titans. So he said there are players on the roster that can do it, but they might add somebody specifically for that job, which is something we've talked about in our road to the draft thing that could happen in the draft.
Right, and one of your favorite things on any of the road to the drafts is that you can never have enough corners.
Never have enough good corners.
And I feel like this year is really making your case for that one.
You could draft a corner in the first round every other year, and I wouldn't
You'd be thrilled. You'd be so happy. All right, you did mention that the Bucs released kicker Ryan Suckup. Was this a surprise to you?
No.
Not a surprise? And then the idea of now what? Because you kind of only tend to have one, and then you released him, and so what's
well,
the plan?
and as we've said, when guys like Donovan Smith and others were released, let's take a moment to acknowledge that Ryan Suckup did a great job for the Buccaneers for 3 seasons. He leaves as our all-time leader in field goal percentage, and he was perfect in the 2020 playoffs, 9 for 9. So great job.
I don't think you win that Super Bowl without him.
Yeah, and he was signed right before the season, like 5 days before the first game. So it was a last-minute change that worked out fantastically.
And a great guy.
He's had a great career.
Yeah, great guy. We will very much miss him around
But
here.
now the Buccaneers have, and I talked over that whole graphic, but now the Buccaneers have one kicker on the roster. His name is Jake Verity. He has not kicked in a regular season game yet. He was an undrafted free agent with Baltimore a couple years ago, has bounced around to a couple teams. Detroit kicked in the preseason, but obviously unproven. But he's the only guy on the roster. Now, there are some guys in the draft. These are probably 3 of the top 4 or 5 that are available. You can't discount this. Almost every year, a couple kickers get drafted, and there's been something like 23 kickers in the last 10 years of drafts have been taken. So kickers do get drafted. And then you look at the free agents that are out there. Now, the first name on the list there, I swear that this graphic was made before rumors were, reports, I should say, came out last night that the Buccaneers could be signing, had maybe reached agreement with Chase McLaughlin. So if that proves to be true, then okay, hey, great graphic, we're already ready for it. But that's not something the Buccaneers have announced yet.
Yep, our favorite asterisk to put under our show at all times is we cannot say things unless they are officially Buccaneers reported, so we've heard
But
those.
I can talk about him, though.
But he was already on your graphic.
The guy, well, he's 26 years old, which is a lot younger than most of the free agent kickers. Like you saw Robbie Gould on there, he's 40. I think Brett Maher's like 34 or 36. So 26 years old, young kicker, bounced around a lot. I mean, played for 6 teams over the course of 3 seasons.
Wow.
But last year, he went back to Indianapolis, where he'd briefly been before, and stayed there the whole season. And he made 9 of 12 field goals from beyond 50 yards. In fact, in his career, he's 17 of 21 from beyond 50.
That's a big deal.
So
because that's what Bowles has said. That's what
said it yesterday.
Yep. He just keeps talking about the fact that you got to know you can hit those longer ones, and that's a tough thing, because I know that was something that Suckup had really, he did well in some ways earlier in the season, and it just felt like that was
well, over 3 seasons he only tried 10. They only put him out there for 10 of those, and he made 4 of them. So again, we said, and it's been said by many people, Ryan Suckup is exactly what the Bucs needed. Yep. Especially that first season. But at this point, and especially in today's NFL, every team seems like has a kicker that can make a 55-yarder. So you're kind of at a disadvantage if you don't have one of those. And
then we mentioned the idea of those owners' meetings and that Coach Bowles spoke. That's also where typically any new rule changes get voted on and implemented. So were there any that were notable that came out of that in your mind?
There were, I think, maybe a total of 17 changes to rules and bylaws, resolutions. Most of them were kind of boring, to be honest with you.
Well, when you use the word resolution, you know, it's never really that
those
exciting.
Where it says whereas.
Yeah.
Did you ever do that in high school? I think it was student government or something.
Right, and you just want to make it sound real fancy.
Yes, so they all say whereas, and then the bottom it says resolved, and then it states what it's there for. A lot of them are boring. Like, one of them is move the waiver period. If a guy's cut or waived on Friday or Saturday of the last week of the regular season, then the waiver period lasts till the following Monday. Did you know that it didn't, first of all?
Yeah,
yes.
thrilling.
So, a couple of them, though, were interesting. One of them, I think, it's funny because we've been shaking our head at this for years. There's a weird loophole in the injury report every week, in which, you know how a guy like Ryan Jensen goes on IR, and then when he's going to come back, he's designated for return,
right.
and then he can practice with the team for 3 weeks, and he can be activated to the active roster the day before the game and then play.
Yeah.
But if you're on that designated for return, you're not on the active roster, and if you're not on the active roster, you don't have to be reported on the injury report. So probably the most injured guy that should be reported about, you don't put on your injury report.
Yeah.
And last year when that would happen, we'd be like, this is so silly.
Yeah.
But that's what it was. They changed that rule, took that loophole out.
Interesting.
Failed fourth down attempts can now be reviewed by the replay official. That one's kind of big. There's only going to be one cut down date next preseason.
That one to me is really interesting,
Yeah.
especially when, we talked about the idea of last year in particular, it felt like we were all really enjoying the stories of guys like Devin Tompkins that have these big camps, and you want to know if they're going to get enough time. You want to see more of them to know, was this just a was this a fluke? Was this a thing? And I think about even guys like, the ultimate example is Cam Gill, who didn't get basically any
no preseason.
No preseason. He still was able to prove his way on, but how hard that is. And there are some of these guys that, every day longer they can try to prove themselves is important. So I think that's great.
I'll tell you another reason why I think it's important. It wasn't that long ago that practice squads were like 8 players, and they just kind of cycle through guys, and they every now and then they got promoted to the active roster, but not a lot. Now you have 16-man practice squads for the entire season, and you can elevate any of them during the season, so it's like an extension of your roster. So having those guys, not having to cut those guys and then bring them back 2 weeks later makes a lot more sense.
Right.
Right.
That's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
And of course, guys can wear 0.
That's it.
Yep.
That's right.
I love that. I'm going to have to get me like
Who's going to be first?
I don't know.
So right now, can you guess? There's one number that has been worn by the fewest number of players in team history.
Would it be 0?
No. Well, yeah. Now that before that.
Right. Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Maybe 99?
No, that's been like 3 or 4. The number one, and you'll see why when I tell you, is 63, which was Leroy. Leroy Selman, drafted in our inaugural year, got 63, wore it for 8 years, and then or 9, and then one of those was on IR. And then after he retired, they retired his number.
Right.
So he wore it first, and nobody was allowed to wear it after.
Yeah.
So the 63 was it. Somebody at some point is going to wear 0 for the Buccaneers, and they will be as unique and one of a kind as Leroy Selman, at least for a while.
That's pretty cool. I just feel like it's just so interesting. And then same the 99. That's the rule now that kickers can wear it, right?
I think they can wear anywhere from. Yeah, they did expand the kickers.
Yeah, the kicker one as well.
They can wear most numbers now. Which is going to be weird.
Yeah,
it's like college.
Yeah, I just feel like it makes me think of the Agent 0 nickname for somebody, which is going to be very fun. All right, well, we are after this going to shoot our road to the draft, so that is where you'll need to come back to check out any of these things that we talked about, how they could impact what the Buccaneers might do in the draft. We'll be back here next time on another Bucs Insider Live.